In the beginning, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat.
No, Odysseus, let him rack his brains with you and the other captives how to fight.
Guilty.
Impossible. Trust me.
No one to weep for me, my friends. No wedding song.
Amo verumque cano, Troiae qui primus laboris Italiam
Dante ha fatto il pieno e per gli altri è rimasto ben poco, which means that Dante filled up.
I was the more deceived.
Confess that you were very bad to hurt my feelings.
Cried Candide, I'm through.
Enough. Who are you then?
Part of that force which would do evil evermore, and yet
She was eating a maraschino ice at that precise moment.
There is no
When Gregor Samsa woke up one morning, he found himself changed in his bed into a monstrous dung beetle.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back now to Lesson 3 in our Living Literature series. You've survived the first two lessons, and now we move from the Hebraic world. We looked last time at two, let's call them sacred texts of the Hebrew world, Genesis and Job. We now move to one of the sacred texts of another strain in Western civilization, the Greek or Hellenic strain, and this is Iliad. I want to start by asking for questions, as I promised I would do at the beginning of each hour, but I'm going to ask one first. I'm going to take the prerogative, seize the power here, and ask the first question. How many of you had difficulty reading Iliad? Yeah, I see a lot of hands go up. Talk to me about that. What was difficult about it? Peter, would you start?
Well, I think it was just the language, the names. It reminded me of a Russian novel. Each individual has about 4 different names, and I kept searching back in the glossary to find out who they were referring to.
Yeah, it's annoying for a while, isn't it? Yes, especially when you meet Agamemnon, and then he is Atreides, and then he is Atreus' son, and all of that sort of stuff. It gets a little confusing, but after a while, I'm assuming that the names start to become familiar. And you're right. The analogy to the Russian novel is a good one. We're going to be reading both Crime and Punishment and the Death of Ivan Ilyich this term. And in the Death of Ivan Ilyich, in that first chapter, you're going to be hit with about 7 or 8 different Russian names, none of which you'll be able to pronounce, and you'll just be cursing and lashing and gnashing your teeth when confronted with it. Yeah, but I think the names do, would you agree with me, the names do become familiar over time as you read through?
Good glossary helps too.
Yeah, good glossary helps a lot, yes. It's never fun to have to go to a glossary, though. Yeah.
There was a lot of patriarchal
yes.
Which reminded me a lot of the Bible. I mean, the sons of the fathers, and it goes back. And there was a tremendous amount of respect, too, that the sons were accorded because of their fathers.
Yes, there is a lot of genealogy in the work, yes. That has suggested to some scholars what the audience for Iliad, who the audience for Iliad might have been. We do know that Iliad is meant to be heard rather than read. We're fairly confident of that. And it was probably told by a professional singer of tales, a rhapsode, to use the Greek term, which translates literally into scene stitcher. Isn't that a marvelous definition? Scene stitcher, which is exactly the way Iliad works. Had we 18 hours, we would go through this thing scene by scene and watch how the emotional effects are achieved through this stitching of scenes. We don't know anything about Homer, really. We think he lived south of Troy in Ionia, which is now, which is southern Asia Minor, which is now southern Turkey. Tradition has it that he was blind. And if we want to get really romantic, we can imagine this blind old man coming into a tribe, probably. I don't even think we're yet into city-state, coming into a tribal area, sitting down in front of the fire, and beginning Iliad with that tremendous first word, menis, which means wrath, anger. And you get this little prologue, which in essence is a promise to the audience of what kind of story this guy is going to tell. When he sits down to tell his tale, who knows what he's going to be talking about? But boy, within about 12 lines, you know what the tone is, you know what the subject is, you know exactly what this guy is going to talk about. Yeah.
puzzled by the relationship between the gods and the human beings.
Yes, good question.
It was very difficult for me to justify what was going on.
Good question. You want to help her? Let's talk about that. Yeah.
Well, I think the immortals were a little mortal, and the mortals had some immortality in them. They were like children of the mortals. They were petty and they had a great many human qualities. But in the end, they prevailed because they were the all-knowing, all-powerful. But it is a very strange dichotomy there.
Well, the movement from the Old Testament to the God of the Old Testament to the Greeks is really a rather radical shift, isn't it? These gods are, the first thing we will say about them, of course, is that they're immortal, and that colors everything. I think for most of you, you will find the gods somewhat less serious than the humans because of that very fact. They will suffer setbacks. They will even suffer the occasional pain, but they will not suffer in the same way that the human beings will, because of the ever-present fact of death that the human beings have to confront.
The teller of tales invokes the muse, whereas in Genesis we say, and God spoke.
That's a big difference again, yes, indeed. He invokes Calliope, sweet-voiced, beautiful-throated, is a more literal translation of Calliope. She is the muse of epic poetry, and it's his way of saying to his audience, what I'm going to tell you is true. And that Calliope is speaking through me. The rhapsode becomes very much the medium for the epic. I'm putting that in your head because I want you to see Milton many, many, many years later playing with the same idea, that he is merely a vehicle for the higher truth. I want to come back, though, to this relationship between gods and men, or gods and women.
They were so fickle.
No, tell me about it. I mean, how many of you find yourselves laughing at them sometimes? You do, don't you? Yes. One of their functions, it seems to me, in this epic is to relieve the tone. The tone in the epic in this epic particularly, can be very, very heavy. It's a question I'm going to come back to a little later. Everything is on a large scale. The scale of this is really quite enormous, isn't it? When characters feel things, they feel things in a huge way. And the gods are sometimes very serious, sometimes moving events, sometimes manipulating the individuals, but at other times they're just a scream. Let's use this as an example in Book 1. When Thetis comes to Achilles' mother, Thetis comes to Zeus to ask, as a suppliant, asking that the Achaeans be beaten back because of their treatment of Achilles. Do you remember Zeus's reaction? Yeah. I'm sorry to do that to you. That's a small detail, but it's a scream. Chadwick, right?
Chadwick, yeah. First, he was very reluctant because he was afraid of the wife, Hera.
Yes, it's an incredible scene. Do you remember? He goes, oh, if she sees this, am I gonna get it? And of course, it's absolutely hysterical, isn't it? It's like something out of a terrible '50s sitcom. The Dagwood Bumstead character, being put upon by the wife. And of course, what he's communicating is that there is going to be a force, even on Olympus, which is going to try to block Zeus's will. It's a very important piece of information, actually, that Hera is not always going to obey the will of Zeus, that there's going to be some conflict. But you're right, it really is a funny scene, isn't it?
Oh, it's even funnier when he gives his assent, he nods.
Yes.
And then it says, a shockwave went through Olympus.
Yes, and then of course who shows up? Hera. You're prepared for this perfectly. Your ear hears Hera, and sure enough, in she comes, and she is a whirlwind, isn't she? Yeah, she's remarkable. So I would say one of the things the gods do is take us off the battlefield into the slightly less serious world of the gods. What a remarkable thing to say. And here's one of the real differences you'll see between the Greek civilization and the Hebrew civilization. The Greek civilization...
spiritual dimension, whereas the physical dimension of the war on Earth, and yet they interact constantly.
Yeah.
And the heroes don't go into war without being aware of who their particular god is.
Yeah, that's true. Most of them have some kind of connection to a deity. Sometimes that's easily explained, sometimes it's not. And then the relationship between the hero and the god or goddess is not always so clearly understood. For example, what should we choose as an example? Athena and Odysseus. Now, does Athena take care of Odysseus because Odysseus is resourceful and smart and wise? Or is Odysseus resourceful and smart and wise because Athena takes care of him? Hear the question? It's not easily answered. You know, it's a real chicken and egg question is what I just gave you. Others, though, it's quite easy to see. And it's quite poignant, it seems to me. How about Helen? Who was Helen's presiding goddess? Who controls Helen? Aphrodite. Aphrodite controls Helen. Aphrodite, the goddess of love.
When Paris had to choose who was the most beautiful.
Yes, so said. Behind it is the judgment of Paris, which we'll talk about before we get started.
Aphrodite.
And Aphrodite rules Helen despotically. One of the shortcomings of our approach to Iliad is that we're reading it in an anthology and you're missing whole books. And you must know that poor Helen. Helen knows that she is wed to a man who is her inferior. This is Paris, and she knows it. And she would like very much to break out of the net of circumstances that she's caught in. But Aphrodite rules her despotically.
She was the cause of the whole war.
Yeah. Go to him yourself, she says to Aphrodite. And Aphrodite threatens to box her across the head. And it's not a happy scene. It is to suggest something about the human's freedom that I think is very important in this epic, something we'll return to, I think, in the second hour. The notion of just how free these beings are.
And that was one of my problems with it. Man as pawn of the frivolity of the gods.
Yeah.
It's true, there was no justice for man. He just was at their mercy and didn't see. I don't know how he ever chose one way or the other, because either way he might get hurt or.
Yeah. We'll see in the, there is that tremendous, the gulf in power is just unbridgeable. And the notion of immortality, the gods and goddesses always bring with them. It's part of the poignancy, it seems to me, in the tragedy of Achilles, that the one person, he's got one person he can turn to and one goddess he can turn to. He can turn to his mother, Thetis, and yet every time Thetis enters the poem, she brings with her the memory and the knowledge that Achilles is soon to die. She can't help him on this one. She can't help him. He is going to die. And every time we see Thetis in the poem, we're reminded of that his death is imminent. And that is all important to Achilles' choices.
The heroes may feel they're pawns of the gods, and yet Agamemnon blamed his whole disagreement with Achilles on the gods.
On Ate, yes, he was in the throes of Ate, he says, A-T-E. Yes. And good for you, you're groaning, you don't like this, huh? Yeah, neither do I. I think most readers go, come on, how convenient. Oh, I was in the throes. I'm not responsible,
But
get out of here.
It's just like the Bible in that respect. The Greeks aren't taking responsibility either for anything they're really ashamed of.
I'm going to disagree with you on that. I would like to disagree with you on that because I think we'll see that Achilles. I keep calling him Achilles or Achilles. Please, one's Greek, one's Roman. Achilleos is the Greek and Achilles is the Roman. Achilles makes a series of choices that are really quite free during the course of the Iliad, that lead to his tragedy. And Priam makes a series of choices in the course of the Iliad, where although he does get a little aid from the gods and goddesses, as does Achilles, his choices are really quite free. Hector, too, I think, is a free being in the Iliad. And these are the characters I think we most focus on. Yes, Helen, part of the tragedy of Helen is her lack of freedom. you know. That's one of the things that makes her so sad. I'd even go so far as to say that's true of almost all of the women in Iliad. I mean, the women are real victims in this, aren't they? They have no control of their fate
They're
at all.
property and they're negative.
Yeah.
They're like this,
Yeah.
this goddess who blinded Agamemnon, blamed his on it. Zeus himself blamed. That's my point. There are
Yeah.
plenty of others who
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah.
But you're right about the,
Yeah.
the three.
Yeah.
The question of immortality and Achilles, even his horse reminds him he's going to die
right,
soon.
yeah.
But also someone mentioned that the gods prevail, and I would disagree with that. I think there's a real question of where the power is
Yes,
here and versus will and being a pawn.
Yes, we will have no tragedy. And I think this is. I think you'll all agree with this. We can have no tragedy if the human being is not free to make the choices. What we have instead is a puppet show. What we have is what they used to call a dumb show, where the gods are up there pulling the strings. You're all going to wrestle with this when we deal with Oedipus Tyrannus, where some of you are going to have a real hard time about how much. Where does Oedipus's freedom begin and end in the course of that drama? But now we're way ahead of ourselves. Let's get us back to the gods. Yeah, the gods are, they're just not as important, are they? They're just not as important. There's a horrible scene in Iliad, horrible yet funny at the same time, which you didn't read. In the third day of fighting, in the middle books, this occurs about book 17, but don't press me, somewhere in there in the middle, in the third day of fighting, Hera wants to get Zeus's eyes off the battlefield so that her side can go down and move the fighting in a different direction. So she goes to Zeus. This is in the third day of fighting, where the bodies are dropping in a way that the rivers are choking with all of the bodies. It's horrible. There is so much pain and suffering going on the earth. And Hera goes to Zeus and goes, "Hey, big boy, you're looking pretty good to me. What do you say we do it on a cloud?" And Zeus, she seduces him. I mean, it's absolutely comic, but not so comic. Think about that. While all that suffering, while all that pain, while all that bloodshed and horror is occurring on the earth, what are the gods doing? They're up making love, and I use that term as one of the most painful euphemisms I'll use in a long time. They're making love on a cloud, and Zeus, remember the epic boasts, of the warriors, as they boast to one another? In accepting Hera's seduction, he starts to tick off all of his love affairs. And it's as if he's had little notches on his cloud, for all of the women. And they make love, and Zeus falls asleep. Typical man, right? He falls asleep right away, and the whole tide of the fighting changes. What a poignant scene that is. What a painful scene. Yeah.
Talking about fate again, there is so much difference in for instance, the three books of the Genesis that we read, where that God gave man free will, but the God, Homer's God, or gods, it seems like, as you said before, everything is fated. Their lives are prescribed.
Yeah, I'm not sure I said that because I don't believe it. So if I said that, I didn't mean to. I'm not sure it's that simple. Even the relation of fate to Zeus is not clear in Iliad. You'll remember the famous scene where he holds up the scales, and to see who is fated to win. Most commentators suggest that's Homer dramatizing a change in the battle. The relationship between Zeus and fate is very problematic. It is true that characters, being the kind of characters they are, inexorably make certain decisions that lead to a certain end. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I think we even say that today. And we can even say that today without invoking things like gods and fate. It's a way of describing how character also forms destiny. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's very complex in Iliad.
I had the feeling the characters in the play were much more free to barter and perhaps win their barters with the gods
Sometimes they do. Yeah, the relationship between the
It's like there's so much temperamentality going on.
Yeah, right. You're looking for, good for you, you're looking for an immutable law of the universe that we could all hang our hats on. And do you find it? No. It's chaos. You know, it's chaos. It's whimsical, as you suggest, yeah. Another use of these gods and goddesses, too, that Homer uses, is to objectify, if you can follow this, is to kind of objectify certain states of mind. Let's stay in Book 1, for example. Let me use as an example the fight between Achilles and Agamemnon in Book 1, where Agamemnon says, "Oh, yeah? All right, I'll give the girl back. I will give Chryseis back, but I'm gonna take somebody else's in its place because I am the King of Kings and it is not right that I do without. So, Achilles, I'm gonna go to your tent." You all remember the scene, I'm sure. You can just feel the intensity of the poem building. "And I'm going to take your geros," the Greek word geros, which is emblem of honor. "I'm going to take Briseis." And do you remember Achilles' reaction to that? "Always you have, you know," and he reaches for his sword. Yeah, I see you all nodding. And the sword starts to come out of the scabbard, and then who appears? And then who else appears? Athena. Athena appears to him and says, "No, no, 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 don't do this. This is not the thing. Fight back, check back that impulse." And the sword goes back. Athena is the goddess of? Reason. Yeah, sure. Wisdom or reason, sure. And what you see then is a little psychodrama, objectified through the goddess. Imagine the scene without the goddess. Notice how Homer very neatly shifts responsibility for the decision off of Achilles' shoulders and onto Athena's. Imagine it without Athena. "Oh, yeah? You think you're going to take that?" And out comes the sword, and then he goes, "You whoreson scoundrel, you grin." What happens to your picture of Achilles? You know, you've had this incredibly forceful warrior who suddenly gets very feeble in confrontation. So think of the gods and goddesses that way as well.
For Achilles to follow his destiny at that point, too.
Absolutely true. Of course, the audience doesn't know. What's fun about Iliad, what I love about Iliad, is that the audience does not go, let's see, we're in Book 2, and it looks like we've got about 24 of these suckers to go, you know? They don't know when it's going to end. They're sitting there listening to it. They don't know what's coming next. They don't even know how long this thing is going to be. And part of the fun of Homer, if I can just make a narrative point, part of the fun of Homer is the way he builds you up to expect a certain event, and then he'll delay it for 1,500 lines while he puts in more information and more events, and then build you up again, and then release you, and build you up again, and then release you. Yeah.
Okay. Helen was originally the wife of Menelaus.
Menelaus. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And Paris stole her from him.
Yes.
So where is he?
Who's the he in that?
Menelaus.
Menelaus. Oh, he's there. He's there with Agamemnon among the Greeks. In fact, he's a wonderful warrior. In books that you have not read because of the anthologizing of the piece, he distinguishes himself on the battlefield significantly. One of the great scenes occurs in Book 3, where Menelaus and Paris meet on the battlefield. Oh, is that exciting? I mean, woo, the whole cause of the war comes rushing in. Homer is very interesting the way he picks up the past and points to the future simultaneously. One of the ways he picks up the entire past of the poem is this confrontation between Menelaus and Paris. Marvelous confrontation. And Menelaus is going to run Paris through, but then Aphrodite comes and spirits Paris away, and you go, yeah, of course, had he run him through, and we had a very different epic. But yeah, behind us, I guess we better say, behind the epic is the judgment. There are several little myths behind it. Probably the most significant one is called the Judgment of Paris. It's come down to us as the Judgment of Paris. Are you familiar with that? Anybody tell me about that? Judgment of Paris. All right, at the wedding feast of Thetis and Peleus, whom you all know as Achilles' parents. At a wedding feast, the goddess Eris, who is the goddess of discord, came into the banquet hall and rolled an apple. There are all sorts of variations on this, whether the apple is golden or not or whatever, but goddess of discord now, guess what she loves to do, all right? She rolls an apple in, and on the apple is inscribed, "To the fairest of them all." And the decision has to be made, so they decide that Paris is the one to make the decision. 3 goddesses are involved, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Hera promises him civil power. Athena promises him great military power, and Aphrodite promises him the most beautiful woman in the world. Guess which one Paris chooses. He chooses the most beautiful woman in the world, who just happens to be Helen, the wife of Menelaus. And so off he goes to Sparta, and Menelaus very graciously takes him in to the household. And there are conflicting myths about how willingly Helen took off with Paris, but it's clear from Homer's Iliad that she willingly left with Paris and left a daughter behind as well. And off she went with Paris to Troy. The suitors for Helen's hand, now comes a second myth, the myth of the suitors. All of the men who are trying to win Helen's hand in marriage vowed that no matter who won, if the honor of that marriage was ever violated, the others would come to the rescue. And so you can see what's now happened. Helen has been spirited away, and so Menelaus and Agamemnon's kind of the older brother, organizes this very loose confederation. And you don't need to be a rocket scientist to work that one out. It looks in book 1 as if Achilles ought to be shot for treason, doesn't it? But this confederation is really quite loose. Led by Agamemnon, who has the most men. That's what makes him the kind of king of kings here. He has the most ships, and we also discover in one of the books that he carries the scepter that traces its tradition back to Zeus. That's a very long-winded background, but that's why they are here in Troy. And Homer just picks it up. Homer just shows you a couple of weeks in the 10th year of this siege of Troy. Yeah.
A couple of people have mentioned the cause, and historically it's been Helen.
Yeah.
I'd like to question that.
Yeah.
Why put the blame on Helen when all of these men had many other options?
Oh yeah, sure. But they didn't in the heroic code. Yeah, they're trapped. I don't know how many the options they had, given the world in which they live, given the heroic code that they live by. They really didn't have a lot of other options. They're limited by the world that they live in.
Well, they took the oath to support one another, though. I mean, that certainly wasn't necessary.
And yes, but that defines honor. So you're in a chambered nautilus with this point of view, and let me try to explain why. Because the thing that actuates these heroes is honor, and I think what you're ultimately questioning is the destructive nature of that as the highest value. And I think the poem agrees with you. You know,
like the age of chivalry.
This is what this notion of honor actuates all these guys, and look what it leads to. I mean, let's talk about this poem. Let's talk about the tone of this poem. Let's do a global view of the poem. Is this a happy poem? How's this view of life? Let me play a game. Let me play a stupid classroom game with you. David Letterman can do stupid pet tricks. Let's do stupid classroom tricks. Let's not go back to Homer's time. Let's go forward. Let's say we're all visitors to Earth from the planet, whatever. I can't think of anything. Planet Iliadium. And it's the year 3000 AD. And we've heard, by 3000 AD, of course, we have traded nuclear weapons and we've destroyed the ozone layer. And human beings are gone. They've been gone for about 500 years, but we've heard about human beings up there on Iliadium, and we've decided to come down to Earth and see what we can find about them. So we beam ourselves down, and we're looking for traces of this Homo sapiens, and we find Iliad. And so we read it. What do we discover about Homo sapiens? What does Homo sapiens value? What does Homo sapiens do? What does Homo sapiens look like? What do, you understand my questions? Let's start with, what does Homo sapiens value?
War.
Man, Yeah, it's not really so much, war is more a vehicle for honor. Yeah.
Weren't they accounted for their actions rather than their introspective psychological reasonings?
Absolutely true.
They did not go by that.
Absolutely true.
Yeah, whatever they did counted.
Right here. Yep.
That was the power.
This is it. Honor. Now, why is this honor so important to these guys? It's honor that causes them to go to get Helen, right? It's honor that causes the dispute in Book 1 between Agamemnon and Achilles, right? It's honor that won't allow Achilles to enter the battle until it's too late and his friend is dead. It's honor that forces Hector, even though he knows he doesn't have a snowball in hell's chance of surviving, even though he knows what his death means to Troy, to stand and face Achilles, a certain death. It's honor that motivates Priam. You see how we can go on and on with this. It's honor that motivates Priam, an old man. That's seen in Book 24. I mean, if you don't shed a tear there, I think you're dead. This old man who puts on armor and goes out and kisses the hands of the man who killed his sons. Oh, what a scene that is. Honor, honor, honor. Now, why is honor so important to these guys?
It's related to pride also, I think.
But isn't there the memory? Their memory has to be noted in an honorable way for the children's sake, and it's for history. To keep this honor in the family is very important.
Very important to them, yes. The ever-present fact of death. So how do I overcome it?
It's their touch of immortality, this ability to live on in honor and be remembered, and that's why they make such a big to-do of the burial process and all that.
Sure.
And when Hector pleaded with Achilles.
They'll live on the lips of men. Yeah. Their stories will be told around the fireplace. They'll live forever. And not only will I live forever, as somebody pointed out earlier, not only will I live forever, my father will live forever. My grandfather will live forever as my genealogy is traced. Honor. How do you gain honor? By dying valiantly, huh? By doing some great deed. Not leaving some great work, but doing some great deed.
But it doesn't matter how they achieve this deed. I mean, they have no moral standard like, say, thou shalt not something or other,
Don't say kill.
No. they have, everything is thou shalt, as long as it gets to the basic point, honor. They'll do any devious way, invoke the gods to help them anyway to achieve this honor, and that doesn't matter, as long as they get to the honor part.
Yeah.
They can get there any way they want.
But it's got to be a great deed, huh?
It has to be a great honor.
Something memorable.
But they could be devious, they could be crooked, they could be killers, whatever.
Yeah.
The end result.
But honor isn't combined with reason. I mean, as this lady said, pride. I mean, there is this overweening pride that some of them have in the name of honor, which causes their downfall.
Can you give me an example? Give us an example of something.
Well, I was thinking of Achilles when Agamemnon is willing, whether it be false or true, but is willing to give him all of these treasures, even his fairest daughter and all these kingdoms and so forth, whereas Achilles is wrathful, extremely wrathful. And I mean, all the gods can't understand, and Odysseus, or is it,
That's correct, it was Odysseus.
Yeah, came back, and no one can understand this. So this becomes a matter of pride.
Yeah, good for you, you're right. You're talking about Book 9, the famous embassy scene, which we'll excuse me, we'll look at in the next hour. And you're right, everyone judges Achilles as wrong. Phoenix, the old tutor, comes to him with legends that say, you must honor the suppliant. Don't miss that motif, by the way, in Iliad. You'll remember that the Iliad begins with the dishonor that Agamemnon gives to a suppliant father. Remember when Chryses comes to beg for Chryseis? And how does it end? How does the Iliad end? With the honor done to a suppliant father by Achilles. Don't miss these, would we had time, so many books of the Iliad, so little time, you would see the symmetry of the design. It's really quite remarkable.
But in a way, they did have certain standards too, and I think about it now, it's just that they have this buddy thing. If they, if they would not hurt their buddy, they would always stick together, and the father, they honored the father. Yeah. So they did
and there's even honor, you're right, and there's even honor among enemies. Yes? Right? Let's think about this. Even your enemy, you can treat in a chivalric way. And it's important that you see this, because this heaps more indignity onto Achilles when he treats Hector the way he does. Remember Andromache's memory of Achilles in Book 6. This will break your heart. I mean, this is... Do you remember Andromache talking to Hector? Remember Hector comes back to the city. He's been told to go back to the city. And he goes back, and Homer's always showing us Hector surrounded by family and city. You really, don't you sympathize with Hector? I mean, he really is very noble. And he goes back and sees his wife, who, he goes back to the house, remember, she's not there. She's run like a mad woman to the wall, worrying about him. It's a very touching scene. And then she goes on to describe her memory of Achilles. And you remember Achilles has killed all of her brothers and her father. But how did he treat her father? What's her memory of that? He didn't defile the body. Do you remember? He burned the body and the armor. He didn't even take the geros, the symbol of honor, the armor of the enemy. He treated Andromache's father with chivalry, with honor. Yes, and she remembers that. And what a thing for her to remember. This man who killed her entire family. You remember the Glaucus and Diomedes episode? When Diomedes and Glaucus in Book 9 meet on the battlefield, and they start boasting to one another, and they go, oh, wait a minute, your father and and they exchange armor on the battlefield. Remarkably chivalric behavior, showing the kind of honorable behavior that the warrior is capable of. How about Achilles? Where is it? Where is it? Only at the end. Only when the anger has run its course. Only in Book 24. And so this is what I want you to hold on to here, is this notion of how far Achilles has fallen in Iliad from his former state, even as he is the most remarkable of the warriors, even though he is almost like a force of nature in Iliad. His incredible power, his incredible aidos, his aristeia, as the Greeks would say, his performing great deeds, but so fallen from what he once was.
I was wondering, where did they get this honor business? Because they certainly didn't get it from the gods, from what I knew.
It's a marvelous question. Yeah, it's a marvelous question. This is a very good question. I mean, anybody want to try to answer this? What we will agree as we come down in our spaceship and we read Iliad, we notice this is a very alien world, isn't it? Very odd world. Why these human beings are very strange. We say to one another, we are so highly evolved ourselves. We would not wage war over a Helen.
But we do other
Of course, Helen, of course. What do you want to substitute for Helen today? A market, an oil market? Wasn't that our last war? Yeah, you're for oil.
But we know that human nature's still there. The thing is, we're able to overcome.
But I guess I want to know, why is this honor so important to these guys?
Because they were taught this. I mean, in a way, you think of this being, it's just evolved from the beginning of time, in a way.
Okay, I'm going to pick on you now. All you've done is shifted the historical terms of my question. We're still confronting with why is it so important to them?
Something solid to hang on to, something, they talk about honor among thieves later, but then it helped to lift maybe part of the whole earthly experience to maybe a higher plane than the gods. Maybe they even valued it because they didn't see that much in the gods. Their lives are short.
Yeah.
So this gives them something to hang on to, a code.
Yeah.
Something that's solid.
Would you go so far as to say it gives their lives meaning?
Yes. I
you?
think to a kind of meaning.
Yeah.
But I think they also did value wisdom in people like Nestor and Odysseus.
Yeah.
They were prized for that. They were warriors too, but their strongest suit they were recognized for was wisdom.
That's right. Phoenix as well. Nestor's a little bit more comic because he's the old man and he's a windbag. You know, he is kind of funny that way. But you're right. They did value wisdom, but not as much, of course, as
maybe that was evolving.
Was this the way that they were also searching for immortality?
Well, yeah, I think so. Yeah, but let's look at the human beings in Iliad. Does life seem futile as you look at Iliad? Does life seem to be, the book ends, the Iliad ends on a remarkably powerful emotional note, right? The meeting of Achilles and Priam. And we're told what's going to happen. 12 days are going to be granted to Troy for the funeral rites for Hector so that they can burn and bury their dead, whatever they want to do. And then what's going to happen? Right back over it. There's a great line in Book 17. As is the generation of leaves, so is the generation of men. Oh, boy. The tree dies, the tree sprouts leaves, the tree grows to maturity, and the tree dies. And the tree sprouts leaves, and it grows to maturity, and it dies. You with me? It's just death, death, death. What does it all add up to? The great citadel of Troy, what's going to happen to it? It's burned to the ground. The Achaean wall around the ships, what's going to happen to it? It's going to get destroyed. Everything gets destroyed. Everything goes.
So their lifetime is so important, that little moment in history, they're going to make
do
the
something
most.
with it.
So that's probably why they get their honor. They've got it. That's the only time they've got.
You got it.
They may as well do something.
And we're a bunch of worms today. All we want to do is get touchy-feely and sensitive with one another. We should go out and perform great deeds.
We speak of honor and chivalry, and I understand that, but the thing that strikes me the most is the blatant double standard between the male heroes and the female property.
Yeah.
Because when Agamemnon or whoever took Briseis from
Achilles.
Yeah. And later on in the story, when Agamemnon sends, a little entourage to try and win him back, it mentioned that Achilles was sleeping with some other woman in the meantime. Another prize that he collected.
Do understand now that Briseis, let's be clear about this. Briseis is not simply a girl, although sometimes she is for Achilles, Go ahead and sleep with her. See if I care, he says in the embassy scene. Let him lay with her, he says, about Agamemnon. But she also is symbolic of something for Achilles. She is the Greek word is geras, G-E-R-A-S, a symbol of his honor. He won her in battle. So she's not just a bedmate. She is a symbol of all of the worth that he thinks is his due, being the chief warrior among the Greeks. And when Agamemnon takes that, what he takes from him, in essence, is the meaning of his life. Because that's what he essentially argues in Book 9 in the embassy scene. He says, what does it value me to risk my life on the battlefield and perform great deeds when the hero and the coward are treated the same way? Achilles really gets into the dark night of the soul in Book 9. He's been withdrawn from the battlefield, and he does turn inward. And what he discovers is that code of honor that was so meaningful to him, that he had lived his life by, might not add up to a hill of beans. That the coward dies and the hero dies, and it's all the same. The fates are all the same. Now, having said that, I will go back and say there is no doubt that the women in Iliad are second-class, third-class citizens. If we are visiting from our planet Iliadium or whatever in 3000 BC, we come down and we notice among human beings that they are not all the same. We do notice, for example, that there are men and women, and clearly the men are much more important than women. Men have the ability to control action and fate. Women are pawns and little more. I mean, that's part of the pain of reading this, isn't it? Is when you read about Andromache in the city, and we know what's going to happen to her. Or you see Hecuba. Who of you who are mothers in the audience? You see Hecuba on the gates of Troy, bearing her breast when she sees her son, is reminded of Hector, her boy, and she knows what's going to happen to him. And these women just do not have the ability to influence the events in this epic at all. They are pawns.
Yet Achilles is more pressured by time because he knows he's going to have a short life.
He sure does.
And so he has to perform some mighty deeds that would live after him.
Yep, you're always reminded of Achilles' short life. Although he does toy in the embassy scene with saying, all right, I'm going to go home. I do have the choice where I can go home. But Achilles being Achilles is not going home. You know that and I know that. What it reveals, of course, is that what he wants from Agamemnon is not atonement. By Book 9, atonement isn't the issue. When Agamemnon comes and offers these gifts, tell him I will give him 7 tripods, then he slips in a couple of women who are considerably less important than 7 tripods, And I think almost funny when he says, I'll even make him my son-in-law. You'd imagine Achilles going, oh boy, hi Dad. I mean, what a funny notion. But he doesn't want just atonement. He wants revenge. He wants Agamemnon to suffer. He wants these Achaeans to suffer because of what they did. And he's
looking at honor. Achilles, in the first place, at the time of his great insult, said, down the line, you're going to wish I was there. You are really going to wish it.
Yep.
And I will never come.
Yeah.
I will never come back.
Right.
And so I think he probably was thinking along those lines, too, and in a sense saying to them in his way, I can't be bought.
Well, he does say exactly that. He does say exactly that, because he says in the embassy scene that what Agamemnon is asking him to do is sell his life for this catalog of goods. And he says, life is much more important than things. Of course, Achilles also realizes that there's something even more important than life. And it's not a thing, here we go full circle again, it's honor. Yeah? It's that concept of honor.
Why didn't Agamemnon then sleep with Briseis? Even at the time, he's giving her back, he makes it a point to say, so to speak.
It's a great question. I'm not sure I can answer it.
And even later, in a sense, why? I guess it was his point of honor that his woman was taken back to her father, so that left him without his woman's signal of what he was worth.
Exactly.
And so he was taking Achilles' woman's signal too.
He also may be very aware, if you think of it in human terms, he is very aware, and you'll see it in the embassy scene as well. These guys are real careful not to trigger Achilles' anger. They don't want to do anything that's going to trigger it. You'll notice in the embassy scene how very careful they are to introduce even the name of Agamemnon to Achilles because of this hair trigger anger that he has. And I would answer your question by saying he probably doesn't sleep with Briseis because, boy, would that be adding insult to injury, It's enough to have the symbol.
Yeah, I was going to say, just because that wasn't the point in that taking. It was the symbolic value of her.
Yeah. So. And you're right, too. I want to follow up on a point you make that, you're right that his fatal compromise is when Patroclus comes to him in Book 16 and makes again, you did not read this for today, but in 16, Patroclus makes the plea to allow Patroclus to enter the fighting. Even Patroclus judges Achilles' withdrawal now as wrong. And Achilles kind of hangs his hat on a little legalism. He says to Patroclus, I promised I wouldn't enter the fighting until Hector was setting fire to the ships. And Hector's not yet quite setting fire to the ships, so I'm not going to enter the fighting. And that fatal compromise is what leads to the death of his best friend.
But that other point about where it was custom, I guess, and they all say that, why won't you accept Agamemnon's buyout, so to speak? Because everybody does. It's custom that if this man kills your son or someone else in your family, that if he offers reparation, if he gives you things, people used to say that was okay, so they didn't always take the violent route.
That's
there
correct.
was a
That
way
is
out.
correct.
You could make reparations
Yes,
of
you could
material
indeed.
things.
Yep. The suppliant, honor the suppliant is the unifying
I just
device.
wanted to get back to that. Where did they get their sense of honor?
Yeah.
They were raised on this program of storytelling, and through the years, all these epic historians, they wanted to be part of this epic history. This is what they heard around the campfires. This was their literature. This was their drama.
Absolutely right. It's their sacred text. Yeah. You know, the irony here, guys, don't miss the irony here. They're right. Here we are, how many years later, sitting around in a room. Let's not miss this irony. Talking about Troy, talking about the fall of Troy, talking about some warriors. Is it historical? Who knows? Does it matter? Not really. You know? Was there a Troy? Yep.
It's also this tremendous power struggle between Agamemnon and Achilles.
Oh, yeah.
And by not acting, Achilles was also speaking just as loudly as if he had been speaking.
Yeah, good point. The measure of a man determined by rank or by action. You know? Agamemnon by rank. Achilles by action. And to
And he could bring him down just as easily, or bring him to begging him, which made him give up his power.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. It's interesting. Let me make, Peter, I'm sorry, but it just hit me, and this is another irony. They want Achilles to undo the anger of Achilles, right? And rejoin the fighting. And guess what it is that causes Achilles to undo the anger of Achilles? The anger of Achilles at the death of Patroclus. Isn't that marvelous irony? The focus of the anger shifts from Agamemnon to Hector. There's a marvelous irony there that oughtn't to be missed.
I had a little trouble reading this. I couldn't quite figure out whether I should be looking at it as a history or whether I should be looking at it as something that I could extract from and apply to my own life. And, you know, something like the case of Job. And I couldn't quite find that element in here, and I'm just wondering, you know, if maybe somebody else has and they could help me find it.
Good for you. Yeah, because it is it strikes you as an alien world, I take it. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Yeah, it has struck many readers as an alien world.
I was looking for a little similarity also between what we had read before and this may be stretching, but we're talking about pride. I think that Achilles' pride, and also I think that Job had pride too. This struck me when I was reading the book of Job, that he talks about his goodness, that he can't understand how this could happen to him because he is so good, so good. And this, I mean, if you turn it just a little bit, I mean, that could be that pride also.
Yeah, turn the good from good deed to the action of the warrior. Yeah, the good action of the warrior.
Yeah, to be expecting, not to have special favor or wrath not, rained upon him.
Yeah. Okay, let me go here and then here.
I see it a little differently that Job versus the orthodoxies that come in. I see the orthodoxies as translated into the understanding of honor and power of this group. And only when they relent and get out of that orthodoxy, the Hellenic sense of power, and accumulation of stuff or deeds, in the last book do we see a real sense of power, and that is acquiescing, giving back the body of Hector.
But let's remind ourselves it's only an interlude, because in 12 days we're going right back to
But only in
right
those so-called soft spots where they don't have this Orthodox Hellenic sense of power.
That's one of the most human, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a very nice point to make, yeah. It's where we as readers, as modern readers, I think, connect most clearly to these guys, not when Agamemnon runs through Adrestos in Book 6. Remember Adrestos pleading with him, don't kill me, I'll give you my armor and my father will give you all sorts of things. Actually, he's pleading with Diomedes. And Agamemnon comes along and sees Adrestos down on his knees. And Diomedes is wavering. Diomedes is going, well, maybe I'll do the right thing here and I'll do a chivalric thing. And Agamemnon comes along and says, have no pity on these people. Boom, runs them through, right through the neck, Boy, we just blanch at that, don't we? Isn't that interesting, though? We blanch at that and we still do it. You're confronting, Peter, I really want to make an important point here. It seems to me in Iliad, we confront something in our natures that we need to keep under control. And here is a world that gave it rein, gave it free rein. The soldier can't keep it in check because the soldier lives in a life and death world. It's kill or be killed. And I think one of the things that makes the Iliad universal, among many things, is he does not falsify the experience of war. We are not watching a John Wayne movie here when we're reading the Iliad. We see the pain. It's not like this garbage we see on television, where people get shot and they drop and there's no pain and there are no survivors. In this world, people take a spear through the neck, into the jaw, out behind the ear, through the tendons. Homer gives you every little detail of it, and then he wafts you back to the survivor, to the wife, to the child who will be sold into slavery as a result of it. In short, he shows both the beauty, if I can say that word, the beauty of warfare, the kinds of values that are brought forth in warfare, the friendship, the love, the honor, the sympathy, the empathy. We can go on and on with this, but also he shows you the utter bestiality of it, the horror of it, the unrelieved horror of it, and suffering. It's so true to the war experience. And we want to say, we're not like that. But of course, we just do it in F-16s, We don't get our hands dirty. You know what we do today? We hire guys to do it for us. Talk about sick. Let's talk about it. I don't want to dirty my hands with that stuff, so I'm going to hire some guy who'll press a button, and it's all done with clean hands in a clean room or in a clean, it's not.
Look what we've come to with the Nancy ice skating incident where you hire someone. I mean, we haven't evolved, we've degenerated.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, we don't say honor, we say money. That's what drives us. We have precious little time left, so I'm going to have to ask, we're going to have to hold our questions for the second hour. I promise we'll just pick up where we left off in the second hour and try to plug into the tragedy of Achilles. I'll tell you what I'm going to ask you next time, right at the top, is what the view of human life is in this. Do you see the view of human life here as sad and pathetic and tragic, or do you see it as something honorable and heroic? Tough question, and we'll confront that right away next hour. Thanks for your